welcome to the podcast, Violet.
Thank you.
How are you today?
I'm very good.
And
Thank you.
What I hear, you are a bit of an athlete.
I am, yes. I do fencing,
Yes.
so I stab people. And it's completely safe and a sport.
The best way for you to do it, I guess. So when did you start fencing?
I started fencing in year 7. At first, I was pretty bad because it's very specific skill, so I didn't know what I was doing. But after a while of going, I realized when you practice things, you get better. And then when you get better, I started getting points, and it was super fun. And I ended up on the national team, representing the country. Yeah.
Wow. When did you end up in the national team?
Oh, that's a great question. I'd say probably 2 or 3 years after starting. It's a small sport in Australia. And I'm lucky my coach is the national coach, so yeah, that really helped.
You knew the right people in the right places.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm sure you're also very good at it. What drew you to the sport?
I was dragged along by my dad and my brother.
Oh.
They did it. My dad did fencing choreography, so like acting fencing in New York. So he wanted to try the actual sport, and the kids came along, basically.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wait, so went the acting fencing? Because I told people that I did self-defense, but I actually did stage self-defense. So my kick looks really impressive, but it doesn't hurt and that kind of thing. Was that how he felt about fencing? Like he didn't actually know how to do the sport, but he knew how to choreograph a scene to look legit?
Probably, yeah. I mean, he's pretty talented, so he was probably good at fencing from the beginning. But yes, he definitely knew how to do the flourishes.
Yeah. Is it a predominantly, I mean, this is a very binary assumption, but is it a predominantly male sport, or is there a good mix of people?
That's a good question. It's just like most sports. It's probably, there are many more guys doing it across the world, but there's an incredible turnout for girls as well. Especially when you go overseas, it's just so incredible to see the women, and they're so strong. And they're also really diverse, because in fencing there are so many factors that determines who wins. It's not just you have to be really strong, because there's also technique, there's tactics, there's strength, but there's endurance. And so you actually go to World Cups and see women of like all different body types. I'm really short and petite and small, and just I would say I'm short as well, so I have a shorter reach, but that also means I can be a bit more agile. So things like that allowed me to actually get to such a high level, and it's so beautiful. Just in fencing, there's kind of a custom where like you scream after a point. It's kind of crazy, especially if you've never seen it before and you walk into a competition. It might be overwhelming, but basically after you fight so hard for a point and you really want it so badly, after you get it, you just can't help but let out like a scream. And so you walk into the hall and you hear just like these girls just like screaming all throughout the hall. It's like intense, but it's so cathartic and like it's so empowering.
I really want to ask for a demonstration, but also please don't.
Yeah,
I'm like worried about people's ears.
It's hard to emulate.
Well, yeah, I can imagine it would be just so cathartic. I mean, the first image that comes to my mind is like Solange and Beyonce's when they let out the big like, wah! Like I haven't screamed in a while. That's what I'm realizing.
Yeah,
now.
Exactly, and it feels so good.
Oh,
it really
amazing.
does.
And I think what you said, I mean, maybe you should just explain. I know we're going to talk more about, physically how training and competing is when you have your period, and, how do you adjust and such. But could you maybe, just out of interest for myself, tell me about how does fencing start or work? Like, what's the beginning? And then how do you get a point? And then how many points? Do you understand what I mean?
100%. Yeah. So it's 2 people against each other. There are teams, but we'll forget about that for now. You don't all fence at once. You basically take turns.
Okay.
You basically go to a set of, so each bout you go to a set of points. So either 5 or 15 points. So the first to 5 or the first to 15 will win. Or by time. So sets of 3 minutes. And it's really cutthroat. If it's 4-all, you're doing a pool bout, it's 4-all, the next person to get the point will win. It's not like tennis where you can, have a buffer remove a point. It's really brutal. And as a result, it gets like intense emotionally as well sometimes. But basically, for the weapon that I do, there are 3 weapons. The target is the torso area, and you have to, at the end of the weapon, which is a foil, you have to press the button on their target area. And when that happens, you're plugged into a wire and a light goes off and it goes beep. So when I hit you on the chest, it goes beep, and that's how we know that I actually had enough force to, a couple hundred grams of force to get the hit. Then in foil, there are rules determining who in that moment was attacking and who was defending. And so if we both hit at the same time, it'll depend on who was attacking at the time, on who gets the point.
It sounds so futuristic. You're wired up?
Yeah, you are. It's so funny because it's like such an ancient sport, but it's also so futuristic. Like it's so modern. Like the technology it's crazy, every little wire, and so part of preparation is also making sure your equipment is in good condition, that every of the screws are tightened, or your body wire isn't snapped somewhere that you don't realize. It's like there are a lot of factors.
Yeah, wow. Is it taped to your arm or is it taped to the suit? I feel like I'm massively sidetracking, but I just want to know.
So it's not actually taped at all. You do have a white jacket, you have layers, and it just threads through underneath. And it comes out your glove on your fencing hand, and it plugs into the foil.
Well, as if there wasn't enough to think about. What we're discussing is how does having your period and realizing that you need to just get on with your life and compete with your period. Have you competed on your period before?
100%. It will happen. It does happen. And I remember the first time it happened, I didn't know why I was feeling tired and fatigued. So I think it was an under 15s national championship. And I was feeling good with my fencing at the time. I was really ready to get a good result. And I just fell a bit flat. I was fatigued and I was tired. And I wasn't fencing how I felt I could. And this happens a lot, but, after you get knocked out, it's really brutal. You get knocked out in the elimination round and you're like crying and you're like, why did this happen? I just want to do better. And it's a good experience to have those difficult moments because then you learn resilience. But I remember I was in that state and I think a coach, asked me, like, I notice a difference in how you're moving, are you possibly like menstruating? And I was like, well, yeah. And he was like, well, that could be a factor here.
So this was coming from somebody who doesn't have a period.
Yeah, because it's so relevant for female athletes. You just need to know when.
If you're training one, then you have to understand that that's going to take a certain amount of energy.
Yeah.
Wow. And 15 and national championships, there's a lot of like alarm bells ringing for me where this would be so nerve-wracking and just such a high pressure scenario. I don't want to say high stakes because maybe the stakes are high, but I also feel at 15, everything feels like it's going to be the end of the world.
Yeah.
How did you cope? Like, how did you cope through that period? Do you remember it all?
Yeah, I mean, those types of competitions happen a lot. And so you just kind of get, this may be weird, but you get used to it. And by that, I mean, you eventually know when it's happening that it will end and you will feel better, say the next day when you wake up, or you'll have a talk with someone who will really encourage you and then you'll feel better, or you'll reflect on what mistakes you made or what things in your technique you need to fix for the next time. And I always just try to focus on that. But when it's happening, you're crying, you're upset because you wanted to do better. After you've been through that a couple times, you know that you will feel better.
Yeah.
So just trusting the learning process.
Or even like my grandmother always says to me, all good things come to an end, but so do all bad things.
Exactly.
And so you've just got to like let it pass, like roll off. I don't want to say set water off a duck's back because I feel like that's trivializing it. It's not like that. But, you know, just moving with it rather than against it.
Yeah, and it's actually one of the best parts about doing a sport at a high level, I feel, is the life lessons you learn. It's not just a sport. You're learning how to have challenges and deal with them, face them, and overcome them. And, you know, I've had a pretty great, you know, upbringing and life, so I'm really grateful for the challenges that I've had through fencing that aren't just, you know, emotional, like physically. It's like you're sprinting in a squat sometimes, like, and it's an anaerobic fitness, so it's not, you can't just like train for it by not fencing. You kind of need to like fence a lot, and your like heart is burning, and you know, you're just like sweating so much because you're in gear and your legs are burning, your arms tired. Yeah, I'm not like super strong as well, so I've had to really push through a lot of physical stress, but when you get to like a moment where you're in peak performance, it just feels so good to be strong and fit and stab someone.
And with when you are menstruating and you are either training or competing, is there anything that you do as a kind of preconditioning to, you know, minimize the effects? Like, if you know you're going to feel tired, is there something that you do?
100%. So hydrating is so important. I find that on my period, the hydration doesn't just like go into my body. So I need to hydrate from the day before, or even just the whole week before training and competing. I need to sleep well. And I mean, a lot of girls are iron deficient on their period. So especially when I first started having my period while competing, I went to the doctor to just get advice, and I did a blood test and found out that yes, like when I was menstruating, I tended to be iron deficient. So taking iron tablets or supplements or whatever you call them, iron really helps just feel less, you know, fatigued and sometimes like dizzy. But I also, if I'm like super, you know, just feeling a bit drowsy or something, I won't push myself super hard in training, you know. It's just not worth it. It's worth just resting for a bit.
Is there anything that you do after training to kind of mellow out that stress?
Yeah, stretch, and I'd like to say meditate. I don't do it as often as I'd like because of the schedule of things, but just even having 10 minutes at the end of a session to just stretch on a mat or anywhere, and even just lie there for a minute and just breathe and just not really worry about anything, it changes the whole session. It makes that whole training session so much better, and it makes you able to go in the next day refreshed and just in touch with your body.
How often do you train, may I ask?
I train like 5 days a week. Yeah.
For how much time?
I'd say 2 to 3 hours each time. So that's actually not a lot compared to the people I compete against overseas. A lot of people are like getting paid to do it as well, so they're training just full time. But yeah, sometimes I have a fencing session, other times I just have a lesson, and it's a lot more low key. But yeah, it's quite often.
That's a huge commitment.
It really is.
Is it like amazing to go overseas to these like competitions and be around people who are also putting the same amount of investment in as you?
100%, yes. And you kind of bond with, you know, your competitors overseas. I've made so many amazing friends because you all have this experience. We all have to make sacrifices, like whether that's saying no to going out with your friends or something. But yeah, it's such a shared experience. It really is.
That's incredible. And do you have little in-jokes? Like, is there a fencing in-joke that you can tell us?
Oh, damn. I'm not really sure. Yeah, I mean, but it might be a bit too niche.
Oh, okay.
Like when it comes to like the rules of priority that determine, you know, I don't know. Yeah.
It's okay. You don't have to have
Well, also like fencers just tend to be like really interesting people. I don't know
Okay.
why. It just tends to attract really like smart or just really interesting people. So that's been an amazing, community that I've had.
Well, even how you got there through your dad and your brother, and your dad having done it as like a staged performance stuff beforehand. Does your brother, like, that's an interesting story. Does your brother still fence?
He does, yeah. And we train together sometimes, and he's crazy with his fencing. Like, he's so creative. He made up some move where like he like holds his arm a different way, and it's been like, I remember the first time I actually had a fight with him was when we were fencing. I think because you just get so worked up in the moment. It's really just, the sport is quite like cutthroat. You need to get the point. And I was like, I think I cried one of the times we fenced, and I was upset, but we talked about it and it was fine. And now we have a really good training. It's good to fence him. It's
So
fun.
do you do mixed?
Yes.
Mixed competitions. Oh.
Yeah, it's one of them. Like, it's really unique about fencing. Because of like all those factors, like girls can really compete with guys. I mean, of course, there's a bit different like strength and style between the two, but I train with guys every single day.
What was that like?
We mix.
What was that like at a young age to now? Have you become a bit more comfortable? Like you said, you have your own style, and you're fighting people who have a different style. And I can imagine at a young age, it's quite irritating to be like, well, I can't do that one, or that person's bigger than me, and I can't come at somebody like that. Have you grown more comfortable within your strengths?
Definitely. I think it's more just I've found out what they were. You're right. It is so frustrating when you're starting off. You're like, but what if she parries? What do I do? And the coach is like, you need to figure it out by yourself. Like, you need to actually just keep practicing and you'll figure it out. But yes, it's always, with fencing, it's always about tailoring it to the specific person, because we all have, it's like Pokemon, you have different strengths in different areas. I'm short, but, maybe I can go a bit faster than my opponent, or, move in and out of her distance, things like that. So I've definitely learned a lot about myself and my style, and I think I'm finding my own groove at the moment.
Your own groove.
Yeah.
And you would probably, this might not be, the post, but know your own weak spots and how to counter those things.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, my weak spot is kind of like, is actually focus, like lapsing in and out of focus and things like that. And it's really zen. Like, you kind of have to get to a state where you're thinking but not thinking.
Yeah, sure.
Otherwise, because if you think too much,
you're too inhibited.
Yeah, you can't react in that split second. It's really zen. Yeah.
Is that harder when you're on your period? Sorry, I don't like
Yeah.
using it.
Well,
I feel like such a mansplainer thing where it's like, when you get your period, do you suck?
No, I'm so happy to talk about that. Yes, like it actually is a bit harder. I find I get a little bit more emotional, and when you make a mistake, normally I just kind of keep fencing, but when I'm on my period, I tend to get a little bit more frustrated about it. And when you're worrying about the last point that you just did, you're not going to fence as well the next point. So I do find that. And then I also find that, I tend to be a little bit more tired. And for that reason, when it came to competing overseas, after talking to my doctor, I decided to go on the pill to control when I was on my period and when I wasn't, just because, we're investing so much. I spend so much time training, so much money on equipment and flights and travel, that it just became another factor that I needed to tweak for my performance. Yeah.
And like you said, it's what I think after all that training and such, you said when I'm training and I'm on my period, I just don't, I'll go a little bit easier on myself. Can't really afford that in a competition.
Yeah, exactly.
On an international level.
Yeah, it's world champs. There's only one comp.
You don't want to have to be thinking about that.
Yeah.
Right now. And another quick question is, with training, do you wear any like special, if you have your period, do you wear like extra protection is not the right word.
Yeah. I mean, I have to. I used to my go-to is tampons, and then maybe an extra pad if I was super heavy. But I recently tried period underwear and I'm kind of obsessed. So that's definitely going to be another backup. Like I have bled through my gear before at training, thankfully. So it's pretty chill. But that's not even a bad thing either. It's just a bit of a hassle to wash it out. But you definitely need a little bit more just to be sure as well that when you're fencing, you don't have to worry about it like at all.
Yeah. And lastly, you were saying, and I mean, I would like to know your advice because I struggle with this. When you are fencing and something happens, like you don't get the point you wanted, or you lose it, like they gain a point on you. How do you reorient yourself immediately? Because I'm assuming you don't get much time between each bout.
No.
Is that the right word?
Each point.
Each
so
point?
a bout is made up of a couple
multiple
of points.
So
Yeah.
between each point, how do you reorient yourself?
Damn. Yeah, that's one of the things that is like so crucial. I think I take a deep breath. I do for a moment think about what I did wrong and what I can do better, but you can't stress about it. And of course I have in the past. So, it just depends on the day. Hopefully I'm able to just acknowledge what I need to improve on for the next point and focus on that. I'm always thinking about what I have to do for the best outcome in the next point. You can't just focus on the negative because then you're like, what's wrong with me? Like I did that. I knew that was going to happen. So what? No, you can't. You have to be like, okay, that happened. So I need to do this. Boom. And then you're already fencing again.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's great advice, even if it wasn't applied to fencing for me. Thank you.
Same with life.
Yeah, same with life. Thank you so much for joining us.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.